And my only like just and I apologize. I meant to get to do a detailed review of everything you updated on the doc side or the wiki page side here, Michael. That just other things got interrupted in other areas for me to pay attention to. But I did notice that like an addition to the dev process that wasn't there before, unrelated to using PRs for code review, is adding all the stuff about Stewart. I know we've had discussions in this forum about Stewart, but do you think that's needed to put into the dev process at this point in time, or because it is technically possible to kind of do your local checks without Stewart, right? Some of the local checks, not all of them.
So I put a link. I think I wrote up Stewart instructions a while back. I don't know if this is what you had in mind or something a little different, but I actually did update these like a week or two ago, based on some changes that happened over the last few months in Stewart.
Okay.
So they are up to date. I think the main thing that changed, um, it wasn't much, but like there is an ability added that you could run individual plugins from the command line much easier.
Okay.
So one of the like examples is, I want to fix all the spelling errors in my package. How do I just run the spell check plugin? So I just updated the example command there to run the new command to it that allows you to do that. But I think I linked this from the dev process page on my wiki. Let me go see. Yeah, so like, do you want me to just go ahead and start sharing, or did we want to do other stuff?
I
I don't
think
have
that,
any other agenda. I think it makes sense.
yeah.
Okay, let me get that up and ready here.
At some point, we should address Rebecca's comment around mono. I'm forgetting exactly where we landed, but our goal was Stewart itself doesn't need mono. It just depends on the external dependencies. And I thought we were transitioning EDK2 away from all NuGet-based external dependencies.
Okay, yeah, I can look at that. This is the development process page. So on my the wiki on my fork is actually updated with the latest set of changes, and I'll continue to push this wiki to have the updates just so people can see what the end version of all this will look like. This page here, well, right here is the how to build with Stewart one. So this one should get them over to the how to build with Stewart page. And I guess I'll go fix that so it's not raw. So I need to look at that one. I used like the wiki link thing,
Yeah.
but I don't know why. So the link takes you to the normal how to build with Stewart page, but for some reason it sends you to the raw one. But I'll go look at that. So anyways, that's where the link to the how to build with Stewart stuff is. Then getting started with EDK2
But
takes
is
you to.
the Stewart stuff's not in the current version of the TNO core version of this page, right?
That's right. Yeah, that was something
Okay.
new.
That's what my point is that it's kind of you're doing two things at once, right? As opposed to just let's ship the dev process,
Yeah.
without the Stewart piece, just so that we're focused only on that. I know we've had discussions about how important it is to use Stewart for local builds to get all of the CI checks locally available to you, and that makes sense. But I just don't want to conflate the code review change to PRs with Stewart.
Okay. The reason why I did it was because in the old process, contributors weren't required to necessarily make PRs, right? They could submit patches and a maintainer would create that PR for them and merge it.
Okay.
Whereas now the contributor is going to be directly confronted with the PR
Yes.
and they're going to see status checks from Stewart and results of those. And
Right.
so it puts it a little bit more like in their face in terms of having to use Stewart
Yeah.
now. So
But you
that
can
that
put
was the
that down,
yeah.
you can put that down in the area where you create the PR and it kicks off the local CI checks and say, if you see failures from CI, you can run them locally and the link to the Stewart page for running locally.
Okay, let me start taking.
And I know it's a subtle difference. It's really kind of the same information, but it's about saying to set up and even get before you even like submit your first PR, you have to go figure out this whole Stewart thing. And I just want to make it so that it's more of a if you get a PR failure, go to Stewart. And I think we can do as a further evolution of this documentation, try to shift towards setting up Stewart from the beginning. I think that's good. But let's focus the immediate task on how do we just get away from the mailing list for code reviews.
Okay, so I'll drop this link here down to the PR creation step, and then I'll say that if you're a PR, I think I already have it actually here repeated again. So I'll just go back through and just check to make sure that's integrated that way.
Okay.
I think we'll end up probably just keeping this version or something, and I'll modify this, but it's kind of there.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the full PR. So I pushed this also to a pull request in my fork just so people could see a diff of the changes. So this is showing there's several commits, and then you can go to files changed, of course, and you can see there were quite a few pages updated. There was a mix of some of this stuff was generally out of date and needed updated, but it's related to PRs, and some of it was just directly needed updated.
And you know about the rich diff button there, right, on each file? That's a little page on the right there.
Yeah, yeah, this one.
That's an easier way to look at if you just want to view the changes.
Yep.
You might highlight that when you send this out for the community review as an easier way to look at the actual, textual changes to the wiki pages.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. And you can also do the view file, right? So I'll mention that as well in case people care to just see it without the diff. I think there's two different views they can take a look at there. So I'll mention that. Yeah, I think this is kind of like the set of changes. There were some in areas that I edited, I didn't go out of my way to like rewrite the wiki or something, but in the areas I edited, you'll see I did things like convert some HTML to Markdown, simply because the HTML is overly complicated and doesn't render in all Markdown engines quite as super well. So this gives us visually equivalent changes, but we don't have to depend on HTML and stuff like that there. But in terms of the main wiki content, the main page was so the development process is definitely one of the main sets of changes. I think that was just like basically completely rewritten for the PR process, and we can go over that in detail. The other one was the PR tips page. So that's a new page, and this is meant to just help people that are new to GitHub PRs and using them to kind of find something that works for them. I think part of the nice thing about GitHub PRs is that they are standardized well enough and they're open enough that there's a lot of different workflows you can build around them. And so I don't think I'm not necessarily advocating that anyone uses them in one particular way, but the tip section is meant to show you have all of these options available to you now, right? And so find a workflow that works for you, type of a thing. So if I go over there, that'll be an easier one to just kind of, I think, get through. So this is kind of showing. It starts out by showing like the GitHub UI key features. So this is like the basic stuff, right? Forking the EDK2 repo. Some of this stuff people probably already needed to know how to do, but not necessarily. Fork the EDK2 repo, set up notifications if you want to do that, create a PR, how to view changes in a PR, how to leave feedback and stuff like that. How to view the open and closed pull request in the project. Common things like, oh, I want to find a commit, or I want to find the PR that is linked to a commit. And then this is for like people that just don't want to deal with anything and they just don't want to deal with like the entire clone process and all that, and showing them how you can technically make a simple change in the browser. And then you can create a PR from that and use the PR status checks in order to check your change.
In
Uh,
that last one, I mean, given that we don't allow any branches to be submitted to the EDK repo itself, when you do that through the web browsers, that's still it's doing the clone in the background for you. Is that effectively what it's doing? Or
well,
the fork for you?
yeah. So, well, yeah, you could go different ways about it. So, like, you would definitely need the fork, and then in your fork, you could just create a branch with your change, and then just PR that change into EDK2, and rely on the PR status checks to tell
Uh,
you if you're just changing the README file or something, right?
yeah.
Those types of lightweight changes you could do. I think I mentioned in here as well that there's GitHub code spaces. So code spaces is a way that you can actually run the full development environment in your browser, right?
Yep.
So that one would allow you to bring up like VS Code, for example. You'd be able to compile code, and you'd be able to do all of that using the GitHub code space feature. So that it kind of covers both of those. And it says,
Okay.
a lighter weight and completely free alternative is to simply edit the file in your web browser using the built-in editor in GitHub. So it does cover both of those depending on what people are trying to do there.
Okay.
Okay, so I won't go over forking, setting up notifications. People can read those. If you have feedback, go for it. Mainly what this is doing is it's trying to just highlight for people new to all of this that this is possible, right? That you can set up notifications. And this is where you go in the official GitHub documentation to learn how to do that. So most of these basic ones at the beginning are kind of just pointing people to GitHub documentation. And it's kind of giving a little bit of context around those so that they know why that's important for this process. So that's what all these links are. Okay.
Yeah. One quick question on the notifications, because I think that in our traditional flow, lots of our developers have like special rules set up to direct their emails into specific folders so they know that they have work to do, either as a developer, a contributor, or as a maintainer or reviewer. Is there any information in those links about how to set up your rules for things that come specifically from EDK2 that you are like have been assigned to a PR or for review or things like that? Does it cover how to do the email filters?
I believe it does. Yeah, filtering email notifications.
Okay, that's all. Thanks. Because I mean that maybe that's something to highlight in that section, because it's
Okay.
just converting from our traditional email-based workflow to this. It's a way to connect the dots a bit.
All right, let me go back to the PR. I think that'll be the easiest way to do this. I'm just going to go to PR tips, notifications, and I'll just leave a thing here to now what did you want me to leave the note for?
That link to the GitHub stuff covers they had to set up an email filter for various notifications from GitHub.
All right, that one we're good on. And then let me just go back since we talked about it. I'll just go here to that first Stewart one, and I'll leave a note here that likely drop this, mention Stewart in relation to a PR failing and reproducing the issue locally will lead that look good?
Yeah.
Mike? Okay. All right. So I got those. Back here in the tips section, so we went into covering the notification stuff. It goes into PR feedback and how to comment on a PR and even how to incorporate. One of the things people can do that I think we find useful is in a GitHub PR, you can actually directly suggest a code change. And it leaves it as like a Git patch inside the PR, and then someone can just apply that patch directly. So this, I believe that this one right here goes into that, right? So it says, it kind of tells you how you can, if someone leaves a code suggestion in your file, like here someone suggested, they change this line of text to this line of text, you can commit it directly in the PR. So features like that from like a developer ergonomics and efficiency standpoint have been useful in day-to-day work for us. So I wanted to call that out.
Hey,
Now we
one
go into,
question, Michael, for you. One of the things that has tripped us up is who can resolve comments. Did we specify here, and do we need, to get some agreement on kind of our commenting policy?
I don't
So I
think
think
I specified that, but yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, we need to decide if we're gonna change the setting on EDK2 that all conversations must be resolved. I would suggest yes, but if there's issues about who has the permissions to resolve conversations, that may block us.
So I don't think there's permission problems. I think it's just a courtesy of who does it. And I think it's important that we spell out who should do it. And maybe there's even two different answers depending on the complexity of the question.
Right, and it gets a little more nuanced when you have patch series where with multiple versions, it's like if you push a new version, it kind of resets some of the review material associated with the PR. So, and you may lose some of the context for the conversations that occurred on the previous version. So it becomes an interesting question about what happens to the context across, series forced pushes. And then on the final version, all conversations must be resolved, right?
I think even if the context for the comment is lost, like the comment still stays in the PR. And
Okay.
so it still needs to be resolved. I think the answer there is you mark it as like resolved, I remove this code or, whatever, like the whole problem is completely gone.
Right.
So I guess my suggestion would be that if the comment and feedback is relatively easy to address, the committer of the code can close the comment.
Is the preference that the whoever provided the initial feedback should resolve it? I mean that seems like
So
you verifying
that's a pretty heavy process. What we've learned over time, I agree with you, but what we've learned over time is it's a little bit heavy.
Yep.
It means that like, you throw a comment out there, you got to remember to come back to it. And I think that's kind of counter to what you want. If you really want that position, then you can block a PR by saying, I'm providing my review, but it needs changes. And then that actually puts a block and says you need to come back.
Okay.
But a lot of times, like I just want to comment. I'm trusting that our developers want to, resolve our feedback. So I
Yep.
think that that's probably a better path.
So I think what you're suggesting from a development process perspective is that regular comments that have resolved conversations, the submitter of the PR can review those and address them and then close the conversation based upon changes made. And then if anybody wants to leave comments that actually block the PR from being merged, they'd have to actually do a formal review and say it's not approved, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think when you close the comment, you need to close it with a comment. Like there's a way to resolve it, just end it, but I think we should request that you close it with a comment that you make.
Yep.
To say why you're closing it or that this has been addressed in this version of the patch or whatever, right?
Right. Because there's a couple states there that it can go into. It can be it's resolved as no changes necessary because you gave some description as to why you don't think that the initial feedback requires any code changes, or it can be I see your comment and I've directly addressed the feedback and made the change, or I've read the feedback and I've made an alternate change, maybe somewhere else that has the same effect of addressing their feedback.
Yep.
So generically, is this okay? So we'll say PR author is allowed to close conversations. PR author is expected to leave a comment describing the resolution for the conversation.
Yeah. I think I
Yep.
would use the resolve, because isn't that the word that GitHub uses?
Okay, resolve.
And the only kind of asterisk or question I would put out there is when the PR author doesn't agree with the feedback and kind of wants a back and forth, the suggestion is to leave it open, right? At least for some period of time.
Yes, yeah, because you want all the conversations resolved, and so if there's disagreement, the author and the reviewers need to, you know, come to a conclusion.
Sounds good.
Okay, so comment cannot be resolved until author, PR author, and commenter come to a agreed upon resolution.
Right. And I don't know if we want to have like a brief description of an escalation process, which would be, that's where like the double mailing list is interesting, you know, where that's where we talk about or the hard stuff. And then obviously like the stewards would be the tiebreaker if there can't be, you know, a resolution kind of stuff. So I don't know if we want to, you know, say if agreement within the PR consensus cannot be reached within the PR, then take it to a wider audience on the mailing list or something like that.
I would encourage us not to go to the list, though. I think because then you lose. Remember, part of our goal here is not to lose information, right? And so the PR doesn't contain the resolution. Then you can assuming you have the stewards as a group, you could add the stewards and bring the attention to them to help resolve this conversation, right?
Yeah, I think the other thing you can also do is take it to a discussion, right? And you can have a more focused conversation in that discussion by
Yeah.
adding people to bring them into it.
Yeah. The reason I'm suggesting a wider audience somehow is that, you know, the PR only really gets notifications to those that are invited to the PR, right? So it's if in order to resolve the conversation, you have to have a wider audience. How do you pull in that wider audience? That's my question on this one.
John?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. My understanding is typically how this process would work is somebody with authority like a steward would be required to do the final merge operation on the PR, right?
Well, we allow maintainers to do that, which is a slightly larger list than the stewards. But yes, there is a
Right.
small group of people, right, that are supposed to know the process and
So-
are allowed to do that.
I guess what I mean is that whether it's the maintainers or the stewards or whoever, you have somebody in there who can provide that objective final result, right? It's not just the PR author that's able to make that decision by themselves, right? So I guess what I'm saying is you can't close a PR until you've addressed all of the feedback to the satisfaction of the maintainer who's going to merge it, right? So that
But it
kind of
may
gives you a
not
check there.
it may not be practical for a maintainer to review all the comments and make sure that they're all resolved in a way that seems appropriate. Like, you know what I mean? Again, we're talking about just closing a comment, and so if the maintainer will look and say, "Oh, all the comments are closed," like this PR is happy.
Yeah, that's the state the maintainer's looking for. But if there's one left in an open, you know, the PR is open and there's unresolved, comments or conversations that are unresolved, and we're waiting for them to become resolved. It's just it's kind of a stuck state. Now I don't want to spend a lot of time on that here. We got a lot of material to go through, but I think we have to maybe ask what is the, how do we get a wider audience involved? And I agree with you, Sean. I want it to be in the PR where the conversations occur. I agree with that. That's the right place to it. It's does somebody have to invite more people to the conversation or to the PR in order to have a wider audience? Maybe that's the answer.
Yeah, and I think John is right that I guess the maintainer just needs to be notified of this comment and this disagreement to help resolve.
Yeah, I think that the thing that might slip by is if someone leaves a comment, someone just closes the comment, marks it resolved, and then another person comes in and sees all the conversations are resolved and just merges the PR. So the original person didn't have an opportunity to reopen that conversation. But
And
yeah.
and this is related to, like, some of our challenges in the mailing list based process today. We have seen examples where there's been feedback given and it was ignored by the submitter, the reviewers, the maintainers, and it was never addressed, never resolved, and it got cleared to a push state, right? We don't want to see those kind of circumstances occur in any process. And so if there's something that we can do here to help prevent that scenario from occurring, that's what I want to see.
Okay, so I'll add so we don't spend more time on the topic. I think this is kind of like a relatively low frequency scenario we're going to run in, but I'll leave a note. Look into methods to ensure that both the PR author and the commenter, but the PR author and commenter are both satisfied with conversation resolution. We'll leave it. Okay. Does that look good in terms of, is there anything else we wanted to mention about this? I did mention in the file, I'll just add this for now. I did mention in the file itself that there are two ways you can leave comments, two different styles. There's actually, I can maybe mention the others, like, for example, you request changes, right? And you use the comment box there. So I'll just add a note for that while I'm thinking about it. Okay, so the two ways I covered though is that you can click, and this is a little small, but there's a way to just open this, and you can click this button here, and this is the way that you need to have conversation resolution. So if you click that, you can leave it on any file or whatever, or you can do review changes and leave it, and that will require the resolution. If you just leave a generic comment in the PR, but you do not do that, then that won't require resolution. That'll just be like you commenting on it, right? Like saying this PR looks good, good job, or something. So those are two different ways that you can leave comments. So this section just clarifies that. I will, as I left over here, I'll come back and mention that if you hit the review changes button and you go further down into there, that you are able to reject the PR. You're also able to request changes and leave a comment whenever you perform that action.
Okay. There was one comment on the mailing list, on the RFC mailing list about this, about a potential gap in the review capabilities of GitHub around individual commit messages. I think it was Brian Johnson maybe that left that feedback. And I asked him to provide what would be his proposed process within the current GitHub capabilities to provide review comments against the commit messages themselves. Did you notice that one, Michael?
I did not put that in here. I guess if that's what you're asking,
Yeah.
I didn't put a
Well,
suggestion for that.
Yeah. Well, if you notice the feedback, first of all, and I think I agree with the comment that there isn't a mechanism that I'm aware of.
I don't think I remembered seeing that, but I agree that there's not a direct way to do that.
So maybe for right now, put that in as an open around the review, leaving review comments that we need a TBD, kind of section about how to leave review comments against the commit messages and individual commits.
Well, but you can leave messages for the review in general, right? They don't have to be on a file or a line. And so that message could just say, hey, especially since we do rebase fast forward, merge strategy, that message can just say, please fix the commit message for, whatever, number 2. And
Right, and that's a great proposed process, but I think we need to capture whatever that process is. So that, because today, those commit messages are all inline in the email, right? And they can respond to the code, or they can just respond to the commit message and provide feedback in the email, because it's the patch that's provided is all the text, right, in the email-based one. So it's about just mapping how do you do that in the PR-based code review process.
All right. Yeah. I agree that I think if we were to just go with the simplest approach, it would probably just be throw a PR level comment in there. That kind of ties back into my thing I just mentioned here, though, which is if you want that resolved, then you would need to click that button and then you could track that as a conversation. You can click somewhere on some file in that commit and leave it.
Right. And they can even cut and paste the commit message with the review comments into the conversation, right? It's
Right. Yeah.
So okay.
Yep. I think that's something we can make clear. But I'll cover that. So I have the notes here. Okay, so going back over here, so there's commenting, finding a commit. I think this one is relatively simple. Most people know how to do it, but there are links here for searching across commits, finding the commits in the repo, and then finding the PR for a commit. I hope the thing that we get out of this process is that the PRs become much more meaningful in terms of the way that they encapsulate all of the information about a change. The main issue I have with PRs today in the project is that there's a lot of dead ends, right? There's a lot of PRs being closed that just were something that someone was testing CI or someone put up, and it technically could have been submitted, but then a maintainer made a duplicate PR and submitted that one, and then the other person has to close it, and et cetera. So we end up with just a lot of dead ends. And whenever you're using different tools that allow you, even third party and external tools that a lot of people do use, having those dead ends complicates the search process. And so this kind of here is showing how you can go from a commit back to the PR. And then once you get to this PR, we should have more interesting information there. We should have, conversation. People might be attaching files or pictures and all types of much more useful context around that PR than basically someone just throwing it up to hit the push label. So that's a way they can start using that to go back and get that information. I showed different ways to do that, right? And there's several tools I mentioned in here. So that the first one's the normal GitHub UI. The second one is the GitHub CLI. So this is showing how you can use the GitHub command line tool to be able to search across PRs pretty easily. Finally, we get into something like VS Code, where you can use its extensions. You can simply hover over lines of code and it will bring up the entire commit information, including a PR link that you can go click. We talked about contributing in your browser, so I won't talk about that. And then this gets into the other three methods I mentioned. I don't go into these into a lot of detail. I think the point here is for people to find the workflow that works for them, because that is part of the advantage of this process, is that we're opening up to be more flexible and people can use the tools that work for them while working in the project. So the VS Code GitHub PR plugin, I find extremely useful. This is how I review PRs. Even today in EDK2, I try to find someone that pushed it as a PR, and then I go into VS Code and I can look at it in there. But at the same time, the GitHub CLI is very good. It's all of these are cross-platform. Every single suggestion here works on Mac, Windows, and Linux. CLI might be useful for people, right, if they're using a more command line driven workflow. And then GitHub Desktop is a really good way for people first getting started with GitHub. So if you know nothing about GitHub and you're kind of new to Git, this is an application that is very easy for you to learn how, to look at branches visually and how to push the button to create PRs and things like that. There's a small typo down here I'll fix. Was there any more suggestions for the tips page of things missing that people would like to see? I'll show an example here of how to leave a suggestion. So I click the suggestion button and then just get rid of that typo and add single comment. Now, if I want to commit that to the branch, I go commit suggestion. fix typo in GitHub tips.md, commit changes, and it's that simple.
Now that looks like a really good start. I'm sure we'll get some feedback over time. You know, maybe well after even we deploy this process of, you know, things that different developers get confused or stuck on, and we can obviously augment this. So it looks like a really good start.
All right.
One other note on the commit message format change, because we're dropping the requirement for the CC lines and the reviewed by and act by and tested by tags, right?
Right. I
So
think that's over here, right?
Yeah. And so one thing I know, because I was the one that did the work on it, I believe the patch check utility now verifies that the right CC lines are there and will block you if that's the case. So I think we may have a tool change we need to do. And I forget if I've even added the command line parameter to skip the CC checks or not. So we may have that. It's not part of your documentation, but it's part of a kind of a dependency to deploy the new code review process.
Okay, let me just leave a note in here and
Let me see if it's got it in there. Yeah, so I think I made it a hard rule with some of the recent changes.
okay.
Yeah, it's a hard error if there's no CC tags. So we'll need to back that one out.
Okay, I left a reminder in here on that.
Okay.
I guess we could go into commit message format now since you brought that up. This is what's currently here for the new process. I'll let people take a quick look and let me know if you want any changes. I did leave a note here specifically, just to let people know that after moving to the pull request process, we dropped these tags.
You might add CC to that list.
Okay.
Rebecca, you had a comment? It's like there's a no doesn't have a headset. But in the chat, she's saying, should we mention the PR link in the commit message?
So generally you would have that information associated on GitHub, right? So I guess this would be helpful for people if they're looking at the commit outside of an environment in which they can, because I showed over here the different ways you can look that up, right? In the tips page. So if one, I guess this would be useful if one of those don't work for somebody.
So yeah, so commits that are part of an open PR, you can always get back to the PR they're associated with through that same mechanism. And then once they're merged, the commit can get back to the PR through the links in maintained by GitHub, right?
Yeah, so like that would be here, right? So like once it's merged, let's say you have a commit, and if you're in number one, you can just go, you can type in this URL and throw the hash on the end, and that will take you to the commit on GitHub. At that point, you can click this link to get to the PR. If you're in a command line environment, you can throw the commit hash to GitHub CLI and you can get the PR associated with it like this. And if you're in an IDE, you can get the PR link here. So those would be like the three, I guess, most common ways to get back to that. If we did want to do that, I'd say it's a little unusual in terms of open source projects. I think most open source projects, they don't do that, right? But if we wanted to, we could technically automate that on the whenever the PR is submitted or completed.
Okay. Yeah, I see on the chat that I think that's reasonable for Rebecca's feedback here. So
Okay. All right. I guess this looks good. I won't spend any more time on this.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go through the process really quick. And this is probably the meat of this page. I'll let people I'm not going to read it out. I'll just let people look through this and then give any suggestions or feedback, and then I'll scroll down whenever someone says they're ready.
I mean, for the most part, this first section isn't really any different at all, right? The preparation of your patches, other than the commit message format, is the same.
Yeah, most of this is the same. I think I just updated some examples or something like that maybe, but most of this is the same. Even, patch check is not new. Yeah. So I think most of this is the same up until 9, and 9 is where we get into the Stewart reference.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if on number 9, if making it more of a conditional, like if you want to run them to run the CI checks before submitting to the CI system, you can do that through the Stewart command.
Yeah, I think I'm like most of the way there with you with what's here now, but I do have a note. I'll go back and update this to explicitly conditionalize it.
Yeah.
I think right here I'm saying, the same CI checks that'll run against your PR, you can run locally and that type of thing, but I'll clarify that to make it explicit.
Yeah. I don't know if it's worth highlighting that even that is running locally can be incomplete because you may not have all the different OS and compiler combinations that we run through CI.
Okay, like tool chain and stuff, basically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Even okay. Let me go leave a note on that. Go down to development process and so 9, and then here I will mention that number 1, I guess I conditionalize the Stewart stuff on a PR status check failure. And then the other thing was to mention
Running Stewart locally for a single tool chain doesn't have full coverage. Just so developers aren't surprised when it fails. And they're like, but I ran Stewart, it all passed. So.
All right. I think I might mention how they can go look at what's being used in CI. I'll do a brief example of how to look at what is being used in CI to better repro.
And that bleeds into all other kind of things, like if you're a Windows developer, how do you do the Linux build or and vice versa, right? It gets messy from that point forward.
All right, I've scrolled down to 9+, so I'll leave it here for a bit until we're ready to go further down.
And we're not introducing any new labels at this point, right? I know that's a conversation for the future, right? This process does not introduce any new labels.
That's correct.
Okay.
So Mike, you're suggesting that before someone pushes the push tag, before a maintainer puts the push tag on there, they have confirmed that the correct maintainers have signed off on all the commits.
Yep.
Okay.
As a manual process to begin with, and if we can, fold in some automation around these things for the assignments and for the verification that the proper reviews have occurred, I think that's wonderful. But let's just figure out how to switch over as quickly as possible with the same responsibilities that they have today, right? About verifying that the proper reviews have occurred.
So I left that, and that's specifically covered in number 6 here, in case you
Yeah.
want to look at the language on that.
Okay. I mean, I would put those high on the list to do. It just feels like we're missing an opportunity, but that's fair to move forward without making changes.
For the most part, if you think about like the complicated changes, that's messy, right? The mini patches across many packages. For simple changes, it's really simple. With scope within a single package, it's really simple, right? So, and I think that it's not onerous for those. It's only really messy for the big patches that cross multiple packages or multiple areas of responsibility.
I did want to kind of touch on that in a bit deeper with code owners and our plan there, but maybe we can do that once we're done with this page if we have time. Just spend a few minutes on it.
Okay.
I mean, I guess, Michael, one question, if this aligns with your thoughts of like, maybe there's a room for another page that is, the to-do list or the future iteration list.
Yeah, I think most of this stuff I can address or clarify before we just before Friday. I think the things that spill out and are these larger items we can add a to-do page for. Let me add a comment for that one. I'll just leave under development process, and we'll just say okay. Okay, it sounds like most of this is fairly reasonable in terms of what people are seeing. Nothing's jumping out as being super weird or missing. If people want, I mean, this isn't meant to be complicated, right? Hopefully the process is being simplified a bit here, but it does kind of go into how to, I think the basic workflow here is like you fork, you create your branch, you submit PR, you get feedback, you make changes locally, force push to your branch, and go through the review process. And then kind of at the end, you tidy up all of the different reviewers for the different packages and get the PR in. So that's like the high level set of stuff here, but obviously it's covered in more detail in each step. And then on the maintainer side, this is, I think this is where a lot of the simplification actually comes in as well. So like it should hopefully be a relief for maintainers. So they, the first item here is set up your notifications. So understand how to be informed about things coming in to the project, but more particularly code changes that are coming in that you need to take a look at. Verify the PR title and description, succinctly describe the changes. So this is kind of emphasizing that yes, individual commit messages are going into the branch and those messages are important, but the PR title and description are important now, more important than they used to be, because whenever we start talking about rolling this information into more automated processes, for example, one of the things we do is build release notes for the code. And whenever the release notes get rolled up, it's based on the PRs, because the PRs are usually the higher level description, the thing people care about in release notes. It's the summary of the changes. So if we want to talk about that in the future, it's pertinent that we get that type of information captured the correct way now. So that's kind of what this is saying, is let's allow ourselves to actually make this be useful for different processes in the future, but also just make it useful if someone comes and looks at the PR, they can get that overview of what you're trying to do without having to go click on each commit and figure it out.
Right. So given that in the current email process, that's our patch 0, right?
Right.
That's supposed to have the summary of the change. Do you want to put a note there that the PR title and the contents of the PR description is the replacement
like
of patch 0?
Okay. Yeah, kind of like the cover page, right?
Yeah.
So let me go down here to where that is.
And if there's specific formatting rules that we want for the PR title, for release note generation, that may be something to propose.
What was the last thing that you mentioned?
Do you have any specific formatting that you want in the PR title or the PR description that help with release note generation in the future?
Yes, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. I sent a list or sent an email on the mailing list with like 10 items a few weeks ago, and one of them was a PR template. And that captured the information that I thought was important. I don't know if I mentioned it in that email or not. I mentioned PR template, but I don't know if I described the contents. But if we're open to a PR template, which would automatically get thrown into the description area and leave placeholders for people to fill in information.
Yeah.
We found that there's 2 key pieces of information for an upstream project like EDK2 that are useful, especially in release notes. The first one is test information. You describe how you tested this, right?
Yep.
I tested it with a unit test. I tested it on QEMU. I tested it on a physical Intel platform. Whatever you did, provide that information. So if someone sees an issue in the future, they can say, oh, you tested this on QEMU 7.0 and it doesn't work on 8.0 for me. That's really useful for someone to know if they're seeing an issue and their QEMU version is not 7.0, right? So that information we found very useful to kind of ask people up front. And the other one is integration instructions, because everyone's integrating EDK2 all over the place. And so we found that if you put an integration instruction section, it also makes people pause and think about that, right? They might think, oh, I didn't realize this was a breaking change before, but now that I'm having to actually describe how you integrate this, I'm realizing that it's more impactful than I thought. So those are like the 2 main ones. I think the 3 sections I'd probably recommend would be like description, testing process that you performed, and then integration instructions, just as the basics.
All right. And by description, you mean summary, right? If it's a big patch phase, it's a summary of the change and with the scope of the PR.
Yeah.
No, I'm open to a template. Anybody have any objections to using the template with those 3 sections?
So let me put up here. I'll leave this as a top level comment. I'll say add PR template with 3 sections, and we'll do summary, tests performed, and integration instructions.
Sounds good.
And then people can put like NA or the template usually says what to do if it's not applicable, like put NA or something. But okay.
And I do have to jump for another meeting here. I think we've gone through the majority of the major changes, right, Michael?
Yeah, we have. I think the only thing I wanted to see is what did you think on code owners? Because that gets us most of what we want, I think, for automatically adding reviewers and checking that the right people have left reviews. What did you see as the process to get there? Did you still want the reviewers file, or is just code owners enough? And if we went to code owners, do we need to keep maintainers.txt, or can we, if we just do the switch all at once, just rely on the code owners file itself? Or like, I guess just a quick summary of what you thought that would look like going
I
forward.
think an intermediate step to code owners only is interesting, just to help get some automation for free on the assignment. My concern about doing the hard switch over to code owners and dropping maintainers is the syntax of the files is different and the scope of the file filters is different, and it took me a couple of weeks to really understand it well enough to be able to like even implement a code owners file that matches the contents of maintainers.txt. So I think we're going to have to keep them in parallel until everybody gets used to it and the differences. That's at least my perspective based upon my experience in trying to move from one to the other.
All right, so code owners, there's two things you said, scope or syntax and scope.
Yes, the filter scope, on the file matching, they're different.
Okay.
It doesn't work the same way, and like everything with an arm in the file path, you can't do that with code owners, but you can with the glob filter that we use in maintainers. It's a little messy. So
Okay, so I mean, technically we can do it, right? We can cover the paths we need and things like that. But
yes,
we want to make sure that people are used to the syntax and we have some time to adjust to it. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I
Sounds
think
good.
until you get reviewers covered in the automation, you can't drop maintainers, right? Because it covers both.
Okay,
So
so
I
you
think
wanted
that-
you wanted the two GitHub groups, the maintainers one and the reviewers one.
Yes, but I think as far as phasing in the automation, I think you could phase in code owners first because it's simpler to enable than the reviewers. Right?
Okay.
So I think there's a phasing possible, but I don't think you can drop maintainers until we've had both active for a period of time. And we'll have to figure out what that period of time is.
All right. Okay, I got it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot, Michael, for driving this, and let's get this shared and see if there's any significant feedback to this week. If there's no significant negative feedback, I'd say we're still on track to enable immediately after the stable tag.
And just to be clear, there's you're okay with the current technical collateral that we have inside GitHub to do this. So if we the only thing you're really looking for at this point is that we get these wiki changes finalized and ready. But apart from that, there's nothing else that you would like done before we do the PR transition. Is that right?
Right. That patch check tool is the only thing I've thought of as something that would prevent us from being successful at this moment.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Michael.